Dan and I have been best friends since 5th grade. I'm a woman and he's a gay man, and over the years we grew closer than most. We stuck together through everything. Awkward school days, college, first jobs, and relationships. By 2012 I got married, and not long after, Dan married his partner too. Our friendship stayed solid, even as life got busier. By 2015 my husband and I bought a house, and soon after Dan and his husband rented a place nearby. It felt like life had lined up perfectly for both of us. But things weren't as perfect as they seemed. I'd been ignoring a truth about myself for years, and I couldn't keep doing it. I'm a lesbian. I tried to make my marriage work, but I knew I couldn't stay. Telling my husband was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but he was amazing about it. He wanted me to be happy, even if it meant letting go. His family, who I loved deeply, moved in to help support him, and he eventually found love again. We parted on good terms. After the separation, I needed to start over. That's when Dan and his husband offered me a room in their home. They said I could stay rent-free for a while to get back on my feet, which was a huge relief. I moved in, grateful to have my best friend by my side during such a tough time. At first, everything went smoothly. But not long after I moved in, Dan had a medical issue and couldn't work, so they asked me to start paying rent right away. I was happy to help, it was only fair. Around that time, Dan rented another room to a woman around my age, A. We hit it off immediately. We shared the same birthday, Valentine's Day, and even our pets had the same birthday. We became fast friends, spending weekends at the gay bar, dancing and turning heads. We were just friends, but we clicked in a way that made everything fun and exciting. Unfortunately, our friendship didn't sit well with Dan. A's carefree habits, like leaving wine bottles in his bathroom or bringing people home late, started to bother him. I tried to respect his boundaries and stopped participating in things he didn't like, but he lumped us together anyway. The tension in the house grew, and things started to spiral. Things in the house became increasingly tense as misunderstandings piled up. I had been living there for about 3 months, paying rent on time and doing my best to keep the peace. But Dan's frustration with A's behavior seemed to spill over onto me. Despite my efforts to steer clear of anything that upset him, he treated us as if we were a team causing trouble. Then Dan brought in another roommate, a middle-aged woman he knew from work, along with her teenage daughter. They moved into the basement, and this new tenant, let's call her the tyrant, immediately started taking over. She had a controlling personality and made the living situation feel even more uncomfortable. Not long after, Dan also let another person, E, crash on the couch. He was planning to move into A's room after she left, which only added to the chaos. Around this time, Dan left me a note saying I had 5 days to move out. I was completely blindsided. I had no idea why he was doing this or how I was going to pull it off. I didn't know my rights as a tenant back then, so I thought I had no choice. I started scrambling to figure out what to do, but I couldn't afford to move so quickly, nor did I have another place lined up. A few days later, Dan texted me accusing A and me of talking about tenant laws behind his back, saying, "The tyrant told me you think I have to give 30 days notice, but that's not true because there's no lease." I was stunned. Not only had I never said that, but I hadn't even looked into tenant laws yet. It felt like he was finding reasons to justify pushing me out. Thankfully, when I told my sister about the situation, she passed the news to my dad, who showed up like a hero. Without me even asking, he came with a trailer and helped me move everything out of the room. Dan had conveniently gone out of town while I was moving, leaving his husband behind. His husband, who had a habit of playing the nice guy, was drunk when I got there. He slurred his way through offering to help me and later regretted it when I handed him a box to carry. I managed to get most of my belongings out of the room, but there was still a lot left, including clothing and items I'd stored in the garage. Since they had recently hosted a garage sale, the garage was cluttered with unsold items, and I had stored some of my things with the leftover sale items. I told Dan's husband I would come back to pick up the rest soon, and he said it was fine. The next day, though, I got a series of angry messages. Dan sent me photos of stains on the carpet in my old room, accusing my cat of causing them. I knew those weren't from my cat. Their own cat had been sneaking into my room when they left the door open, and I had caught it peeing there multiple times. I even told them about it early on, but after cleaning up the first stain, I didn't want to cause more tension by bringing it up again. Still, Dan wasn't hearing it. He said I was never welcome in his home again and our 15-year friendship was over. About a week later, I tried to arrange a time to pick up the rest of my belongings. I texted Dan, called him, and even reached out on social media, but he ignored me. Frustrated, I showed up at the house with my girlfriend. The garage was open, but all of my stuff was gone. The garage was still full of their unsold junk from the garage sale, but not a single trace of my belongings was left. When I knocked on the door, the tyrant peeked around the corner. I told her I was there for my things, and she coldly told me to call Dan before slamming the door in my face. I called the police, but they said it was a civil matter and couldn't help me. I was heartbroken. Among the things missing were heirlooms my grandmother had sewn for me, clothes I had saved to sell online, and sentimental items I could never replace. Later that day, my girlfriend, trying to lighten the mood, poured an old frappuccino from my car into the sunroof of Dan's car. It was a small act of revenge, but it didn't ease the pain of losing so much. As days turned into weeks, I began to realize the extent of what had happened. Through social media, I saw photos of Dan wearing my clothes. The tyrant's daughter was also photographed in my things, and even he posted pictures of herself in a shirt my sister had given me for my birthday. It was obvious they had gone through my belongings, kept what they wanted, and discarded the rest. The betrayal was too much to ignore. I started researching tenant laws and found out that what Dan had done was illegal. In Minnesota, tenants paying rent, even without a lease, must be given 30 days' notice to move out. Additionally, landlords are required to safeguard and attempt to return a tenant's possessions for up to 90 days after they leave. Dan had violated all of these rules. Fueled by a mix of sadness and anger, I decided to take action. I filed a claim in small claims court, demanding compensation for my missing items. I sent official demand letters, which they ignored, and prepared my case with every piece of evidence I had: photos, text messages, and social media screenshots. When the court date arrived, Dan and his husband didn't even show up. The judge reviewed my case and awarded me the full amount of my claim, roughly $3,000. It was a bittersweet victory. Winning in court felt like a step toward closure, but it wasn't the end. After the judgment, I tried to collect the money Dan owed me, but he made it clear he had no intention of paying. Months passed, and I hit roadblock after roadblock. Whenever I sent the necessary documents to initiate wage garnishment, they'd be returned as undeliverable because I didn't know his new address. Finally, after multiple failed attempts, the court clerk called to explain the issue. I was at my wit's end and told her my situation. She sympathized and took it upon herself to dig into the system. Moments later, she called back with Dan's updated address. I was so grateful, it felt like someone had thrown me a lifeline. Armed with the new information, I refiled the garnishment paperwork. Not long after, Dan and his husband responded by filing for bankruptcy. I felt crushed. They were trying to erase the debt they owed me, along with all their other financial obligations. Still, I refused to back down. I learned that judgments involving malicious intent aren't automatically discharged in bankruptcy. To make my case, I had to file a claim in bankruptcy court, arguing that their actions, illegally kicking me out and keeping my belongings, were intentional and malicious. I gathered every piece of evidence again, prepared for yet another legal fight. Before the first creditors' meeting, their lawyer contacted me. His goal was clear: intimidate me into dropping my case. He claimed the landlord of the house had donated my items during a spring cleaning. It was laughable. I had never even seen the landlord the entire time I lived there, and I knew Dan and his husband were behind it all. Even though the lawyer's tone was harsh, I stood my ground. I told him I had proof: photos of Dan and others wearing my clothes, timestamps on social media posts, and messages from Dan himself. I wasn't going to back down. When the creditors' meeting arrived, I walked into the room dressed like I meant business. Dan was visibly nervous the moment he saw me. While the meeting itself was procedural, my presence made it clear that I wasn't going away quietly. I moved forward with filing my claim, determined to see it through. A week later, their lawyer called again, but this time, his tone was different. He wanted to settle. At first, they offered me $1,000 to drop the case. I declined. I had already been more than fair when valuing my belongings for the initial judgment. The lawyer upped the offer to $1,000 upfront and $150 monthly payments for 4 months. While I could have dragged it out longer to fight for every penny, I accepted the offer. I wasn't out to ruin them, I just wanted justice for what they had done. Receiving those payments felt like more than just money. It was proof that I had stood up for myself and held them accountable, even when they tried everything to avoid responsibility. They included an apology note with the final payment, which felt like a small victory. But the truth is, it wasn't about the money. Some of the items they stole, like the heirloom clothes my grandmother had sewn for me, could never be replaced. Losing those things hurt more than I could put into words. Still, knowing I had fought for myself gave me a sense of closure. This experience changed the way I view friendships. Dan and I had shared so many good times over the years, but when things got tough, he chose resentment and selfishness over communication and understanding. I believe he acted out of hurt, feeling sidelined by my friendship with and convinced himself that the things in the garage didn't matter to me. But that doesn't excuse what he did. Even now, I miss our friendship. If Dan ever reached out to mend things, I'd be open to it, but I know it may never happen. The legal battle was draining, but it taught me that I'm capable of standing up for myself, even when the odds feel stacked against me. In the end, the legal battle was about more than just the money or the things I lost. It was about reclaiming my dignity after being treated so unfairly by someone I once trusted deeply. Winning, even through a settlement, felt like a way to close the chapter on what had been an emotionally exhausting ordeal. While I can't replace the heirloom clothing my grandmother made or the other sentimental items that were taken, I found peace in knowing I stood up for myself. The money I received helped during a tough time in my life, allowing me to keep a roof over my head when I needed it most. It was a small silver lining in an otherwise painful situation. I've thought a lot about Dan and our friendship since this all happened. I believe his actions came from a place of hurt and misunderstanding, but that doesn't erase the harm he caused. Looking back, I wish we had communicated better. So much of the tension and drama could have been avoided if we'd just talked openly. Even now, I sometimes wish we could mend things, but I also know some bridges can't be rebuilt. What this experience taught me is that I can survive betrayal and fight for what's right, even when it's hard and I feel completely alone. If you're ever in a situation where someone wrongs you, don't be afraid to stand your ground. Know your rights, stay organized, and don't let fear keep you silent. Sometimes, justice is about more than getting even. It's about finding closure and moving forward. If you found this story interesting, follow my YouTube channel for more. Your support means a lot.